People no longer bound by their NDA. What can you now disclose? There are powerline transformers that predate WW1 still up and running in the US, and the utility companies aren't 100% sure where most of them are. They only find out when one finally dies. Someone over 100 years ago put up a transform that powered telegrams all the way to Twitter. Edit. Okay, so people are asking. We'll try to address everything. I worked in the telecom sector. That means I needed to know something about how utility poles operated. On my first day they handed me a binder that was an idiot's guide to utility poles and made me sign an NDA on it. It was dumb because I am sure even back then it was public information. I really do not know more than I stated. I use low VI transformers at work and they are a black box of magic to me. Some people are mentioning PCBs and sure that makes sense. I don't know what they used to cool them 100 years ago. Transformers can last a long time. I have pulled multi-decade ones out of machines, so the idea that one hit the century mark seems reasonable to me, and I haven't questioned it. When my internship was over I talked to a professor I knew about this, and she mentioned the bird poop thing. I am not sure if this related to the multiple fires in California. My internship was in the Bay Area. And I sorta remember the binder being general, not that one particular area. Forgive me, but this was about 2007, so I can't remember this perfectly. The last day of my university, I stuck the binder on the shelf in the engineering section of the library. I am not sure how to locate them or what they even look like. It was just a chart on paper. I admit the idea is really a cool concept, but based on what I am reading here, if you found one, be very wary. My NDA is still in effect, but I've covered my liability. A few years, with a previous insurance company I worked for, we fired an employee who had a nasty personality. Imagine a toxic gamer working in a call center, and that would be this guy. He had been the son or grandson of one of the board members, so he was untouchable. When his relative on the board got voted out, it was finally time for this little troll to be fired. His supervisor took him to a conference room to let him know he was fired, and he was escorted from the building by security. As the HR manager, I was tasked with clearing his desk and separating his property from company property. That was when I found a heavily used 5x8 notepad on his desk that had a list of names. Next to each name was a mailing addresses and details about how this ex-employee planned to harm these people. I did some digging and found they were all current or former clients of the company and that they all had filed complaints against this monster. It was a hit list. I notified the board after I notified the police. The shit was arrested on unrelated drug and assault charges. The prosecutor now had to consider charging this guy for his hit list. Since she couldn't convince a judge there was a strong enough case, the prosecutor decided to empanel a grand jury. Since I was the individual who found the notepad, I was subpoenaed to confirm its provenance. Considering any other employee could have walked by and deposited this list on this asshole's desk, the grand jury decided to not move ahead to a trial. For the drug and assault charges, the former employee was sentenced to 16 years in prison. As a witness, I wasn't issued a gag order regarding the grand jury investigation. However, my work did order me to sign an NDA to protect the clients who were on that hit list. It was really just to cover up that they were in any danger. I signed and then quit as soon as I got a job offer with another company. Those bastards on the board cared more about their profit margin and public image than they did about people's lives. If they figure out I'm violating that NDA, there's not much they can do. They know antagonizing me with a lawsuit would only lead to me telling the media, naming the company and ruining their public image. Edit. For clarification, the reason I signed the NDA was because I needed access to my office computer so I could look up the most recent contact information the company had for the people targeted on the hit list. I then gave that contact information to the prosecutor and her investigators. They just tracked down the last person this year, and everyone is safe and accounted for. The Dogo is a doggy daycare in Minnesota that made me sign an NDA for 2 years, saying I was not allowed to talk about the company mainly, sadly, because they treat the workers and dogs like shit. And no care for how many dogs were packed into a room, which is both unsafe for the dogs and the dog attendant. Often I'd be alone in a small room with up to 25 plus dogs, most who only had the most minor of behavioral tests done to see if they would play well in daycare. Owner also tried to get around not paying my workers' comp when I did get injured on the job, and whenever anybody put in their 2 weeks after realizing what a toxic work environment it was, which was often, he would punish them with scheduling them all week or make them open to close 12 hours for all their shifts. If you're in Minnesota and looking for a reputable dog daycare, stay away from a Dogo. If in the Twin Cities I would recommend Dog Days, not perfect, but they actually seem to care. I used to work for a company that tracked ticket sales for theaters across the US. By contractual agreement with Hollywood studios, we collected information for approximately 80% of theaters, but we were not allowed to collect that last 20%. Why, you may have heard of Hollywood accounting. Hollywood studios work very hard to ensure their accounting is as beneficial to the studios as possible. No surprise, all businesses do this. But Hollywood has unusually high amounts of money in very narrow products, creating a distorted market. And the industry is rife with films grossing obscene amounts of money, but not reporting a profit. Because our company couldn't collect that last 20% of theater data, it wasn't possible to absolutely say that a movie made X number of dollars. So, I can't prove it, but, on Friday, June 21, 2002, the movies Minority Report and Lilo and Stitch were both released to great fanfare. Minority Report's opening week was reported at $35,677,125, 27.0% of total gross. Lilo and Stitch's opening weekend was reported as $35,260,212, 24.2% of total gross. This is a lie. Lilo and Stitch earned more money than Minority Report its opening weekend. 20th Century Fox couldn't have a Tom Cruise feature film being beaten by a fucking cartoon. So someone at 20th Century Fox called Disney and offered a deal. Since the full amount of money earned couldn't be proven, Fox would announce that Minority Report was the top earner for the weekend. In exchange, we never knew what the exchange was. We simply knew that Minority Report was reported as the top earner, and Disney received some benefit for not saying anything. And then there was the shitstorm of Giggly later, but that's another story. Update: technically, I could have said this much earlier, because when the studios found out our company wasn't handing out NDAs to employees, the studios were not happy. You do not make Hollywood studios unhappy. So the company quickly rushed to get NDAs out to everyone. They were distributed per team. They were distributed the week that I was switching teams. So both my old and my new team assumed I had an NDA when I didn't. I never bothered to correct their error. When I was tech before I was a vet, I worked in a lab that mostly tested animal meds on animals. Flea products, heartworm meds, etc. had one product in testing for human medication though, which was an injection that supposedly was going to shorten the need to wear retainers after having braces. Of course, to test that, we needed animals that had worn braces long enough to replicate the changes that happen to human mouths that have had braces. What I'm getting at was that some days it was my job to brush the mouths of like 50 beagles that all had braces and make sure the wires and brackets were in place and not causing any trauma to the lips. Or can give a .the image of dozens of goofy little dogs clacking around me in circles around the lab, super excited to see me, doing their ridiculous beagle howls and flashing their braces as they did so will never leave my brain. Still bound, can't say where it was. Was terminated 3 times by the same company for a disability. Ended up getting a rather large cash settlement from them to avoid taking them to court. They're bound not to say they terminated me. I gave them notice, and the next day I got a letter saying I was fired. That's not how that works, and I'm bound not to report disability discrimination or elder abuse that I witnessed. Funny story: NDAs can't prevent you from making a report as a mandatory reporter to a governing body in my state. I reported them anyway. They tried to claim I violated the NDA, and the governing body in my state went ballistic and slammed them with a 7-figure fine. The CEO, CFO, and CNO were all forced to quit. The place is currently facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for multiple negligent wrongful deaths. I didn't violate the NDA and kept the settlement. Fuckers. Work in film VFX, so there's a lot. Let's see, I mean the obvious is always that studio interface equals shit movie. I've never worked on a film and heard the studio wants to reshoot the sequence and never had it turned out to be a good thing. But my guess is 99% of you know that. So is specific. There are so many good movies you'll never get to see because of studios. I mean, you'll see them, but not until they're recut, reshot, and completely devoid of any artistic vision that created them. People point to the Snyder Cut or now Suicide Squad, and I can honestly tell you if a film is over 50 million and not directed by Scorsese, Nolan or Tarantino, it's created by a mindless collection of studio executives who don't know shit about filmmaking. Ad Astra was incredible and would have been such a tribute to 2001, but the studio saw it and got scared of James making a slow-paced science fiction film that made you think. They pulled it from him, made a mess when it was given to a second editor because he wanted to add 15 million in new VFX shots, then given back to James to fix. But with this new direction. Woman in the Window was interesting, and while not a great thriller, something that was decent and thought-provoking. Think Shutter Island. But 3 test audiences in New Jersey, a second distribution company, Fox to Disney, and a second director for massive reshoots created the shitshow that was unloaded on Netflix. There are several big-time films that'll never see the light of day because the studio bought them and is sitting on their release. Things you've never heard of with great directors and casts because the studio doesn't want to be associated with it for whatever reason. Weinstein was notorious for this, but several other producers have done the same. What's going on with Scarlett Johansson right now is YA too common for everyone in the industry. Only difference is she's above being blackballed and has the money to pay for the lawyers needed to defend her. Finally, just know if you go to a film and say how did they not fix that shot, realize the director wanted to, we just didn't get approval, or who comes up with this shit, it probably wasn't shit until the studio got involved. The sequel trilogy had a plan. You can even see the narrative coming over the hill for the final stretch in the closing moments of the last GD. Kylo Ren was supposed to die evil. He was literally supposed to be an embodiment of the antithesis of the hero's journey. Like if Luke Skywalker was born evil and had to resist the light to become ultimate evil. It would be Rey's one great failure. She could not save him. It was supposed to be a message to young girls that just because you want to fix someone doesn't mean you'll always succeed. However, TPTB, Kofkathlinkoff, chickened out when they saw how huge the Lilo fandom was and scrapped their plans for 9 and hired JJ to crap out whatever the hell Rise of Skywalker was. I cannot wait for the tell-alls to be written about the making of that trilogy. I have tons more details about what went down too, like Driver only being down for the role if the ending stayed the same and how pissed he was when it changed. I was Guy Fieri's body person for 6 months. This involved a lot of personal assistant shit. Booking travel, air, Ubers in a pinch, dude usually rode around in all black sedans, confirming what the advanced teams did before Guy gets there. Most of my job was to handle his personal life when he was on the job. I had to sign 3 NDAs, but I'm only sharing what happened on the show. GUI gave me the impression he really didn't like what he did. Every morning he would say more of this bullshit, even on so-called buffer days, when we had an extra day before or after shooting, and we had much of the day to ourselves. After 3 weeks of working with him, I figured out that Red Bulls are his binky. He's got some crazy ADHD, so the caffeine really didn't faze him. When he would get stressed out, he'd rage up a little, but then he'd completely shut down. A Red Bull just made him calm again. I does not remember the shit he says. People walk up to him and joke about Flavortown, and he'd look at me after the fact and ask what's Flavortown. I had to remind him that he came up with that. My favorite was someone who went on a cruise. Apparently Carnival Cruise Lines has guys' restaurants. I haven't been on a cruise yet, I'll find out sooner or later. Anyway, this fan loved the donkey sauce that he put on his burgers. Dude, Deadass didn't remember he did that. I had access to his computer and I saw recipe drafts for D sauce. There were scores of events similar to this every single time. Guy would have no idea. It sort of floors me that this guy influences so many people and he doesn't give a damn. He doesn't hate his fans, but he thinks interacting with people is a hassle. He legit doesn't understand why he's a celebrity, which boggles my mind how much effort he puts into his shtick. That one British chef who lied about cooking for the Queen has more cognizance about his fame than Guy. On a personal note, his family is full of sweethearts and I went above and beyond a few times to help them out. All I want to say about his fam. They're really nice people. Edit. Correcting something inaccurate I said. Robert Irvine lied about cooking for 4 US presidents, having a British knighthood, owning a castle in Scotland, helping make the wedding cake for Charles and Diana, some other things. Never said he cooked for Queen Elizabeth. That's in Kingfield regrets the error, considering it was over 13 years ago. Uber was planning to make their own Google Street View for use in the app to better help drivers find riders and to map the world for driverless car technology. But they were going to use Uber drivers to capture the images for the Street View. The plan was to mail out inexpensive GoPro-like devices that magnetically attach to the roof of the drivers' cars. Each would have South Dakota cards that could be mailed back to Uber. Routes would be generated and the drivers could accept them in the app and get paid. This plan fell through quickly and Uber eventually sources this data from third parties and ultimately abandoned their in-house driverless car ambitions. Also, Microsoft developed a really cool backpack-mounted camera that was going to be used for something like Google Street View. The plan was to take it into pedestrian-only areas so you could get imagery indoors like malls and in walking spots. The United States military snatched up the entire project for their own use and that product was never released or even announced to consumers. Netflix has created a group of AI that will essentially be like the Skynet of streaming media. It can predict with crazy accuracy what you'll click on based on not only your previous views and clicks, but the time of year it is in your location, the weather going on outside your window, and the kinds of movies you like to watch when it's raining or snowing. It figures out your likely holidays celebrated, your favorite colors, typefaces, and genres. This leads into the marketing AI. They have created an AI-driven software that creates movie posters and promotional art for a film or show appear to be whatever genre they want. For instance, it'll create artwork for an action movie that makes the movie look like a rom-com if you're into rom-com and not actions. It's literally an automated super smart Photoshop-like computer just for film TV artwork. I worked as a freelance 3D animator and did a lot of Kickstarter projects. Everyone had their own million-dollar idea and loved to blast you with NDAs to keep you from stealing their idea. Anyways, one guy wanted to basically make a type of smart belt that just played videos and was convinced he was going to sell it to Gucci. The guy was super nice, paid really well, and was a joy to work for, but had no business sense. Well, the NDAs expired, and the Kickstarter page seems to be erased from the internet, so here's the trailer I ended up making, edited out some bits to remove guy's personal info, https://www.youtube.com/watchVNG:\VHC7NOZQSBASICALLY. The belt was physically impossible to manufacture, but he wouldn't let me alter the design to fix it. Made for some cool shots for my demo reel though. 1. Unless things have changed drastically, that popular restaurant being accused of selling not tuna really is actually selling tuna. And not cheap stock either. It's just masked by a shitload of mayonnaise. 2. They actually sent out their olives for DNA testing because they were sure one of the suppliers was selling them an olive of cheaper quality. Which also makes the tuna thing make no sense to me. 3. I knew about specials and new things way before they ever made it into the store. We'd start testing the stock at least 6 months before a promotion started. 4. Shady hiring employment practices were the norm. Similar to what FedEx Ground was accused of in a lawsuit from about 7 years ago. Edit. Okay, so, I was quality assurance. I knew the menu and food items inside and out. With and without sauces. Things that were experimented with that never wound up in stores. You the ace trainer mentioned adding pickle juice to the tuna. Little changes like that became allowed about 8 years ago. It was never said in so many words, but I think the execs were pressured by the few franchisees who owned a good chunk of the stores to allow them leeway. So you might run into some non-standard things offered in stores. Example, in the Chicago area you may see giardiniera, this may be elsewhere by now, I don't know, or the pickles may taste different, better. Oh man, I ate those by the cup. I saw allow, because if there is one thing they hate, it's any kind of difference in food between regions and stores. Not my own, but from a family friend. Coca-Cola and Pepsi regularly settle disputes behind closed doors on things like employees trying to quit and join the competitor. Their employment contracts have entire clauses stating you cannot be employed by the competing companies even after you quit, so, to protect company intel and confidentiality. For example, a Coca-Cola employee feels like he is being mistreated by the company, so he quits and tries to work for Pepsi. So Pepsi's legal team will inform Coca-Cola as soon as they find out, and Coca-Cola will sue the guy for breach of contract, and in return Pepsi will pay them. This is done, so Pepsi and Coca-Cola don't sue each others into bankruptcy for breach of laws regarding industrial competition and market regulations. Basically a peace treaty of sorts. I worked on a legal survey for a lawsuit over the murder of Philando Castile back in 2016 that was conducted by dialing various people across the US and asking them various questions, one of which was an open-ended question where they were invited to describe any incidents of police brutality they had personally experienced or witnessed, which the interviewer was then supposed to type word for word. I worked both an interviewer and as a quality assurance professional, which meant it was my job to go through completed surveys and check spelling and grammar errors, as well as check to make sure the information being entered was accurate. So if any of the open-ended typed responses didn't make sense or seemed like they were typed incorrectly, I would go back and listen to the survey and retype the response exactly. On this particular survey, since it was so important legally, we had to go back and listen to every open-ended response, something we normally would only do like 10% of the time. There was one response where the surveyed man had described an incidence of racial profiling and police brutality based on the fact that he was Latino. The interviewer didn't type any of it and just typed "no" as the response. We went back and listened to every survey that individual had conducted on the project, and she had been intentionally coding responses incorrectly to twist the data into a more positive opinion of police in general. It was clear she had a bias that she was expressing in the incorrect coding. She was removed from the project and we edited her survey input to reflect the actual responses. We had an employee that was constantly calling in sick. Twice, we had to call an ambulance to work because of her heart palpitations. Her fellow employees told us that she would call them that night to go shopping after being removed by ambulance hours earlier. There were a lot of rumors of drug use. She would show up the next day like nothing happened the day before. There was drama about her having to pay the ambulance bills first before our health plan would reimburse her. Her stoner boyfriend got fired from the company, which just ramped up her emotional distress and inability to show up for work. Our manager decided to cut our losses and package her out. He was finalizing her termination package, which would have included a severance payment that would have solved their short-term money problems when she quit. I saw her a couple of years later on an airplane. I didn't tell her what she missed out on.